The desert stretched endlessly under a blood-orange sky. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the rugged terrain, where silence was broken only by the whisper of the wind across the sand and the distant cry of an eagle. Dust devils twisted through the sagebrush, carrying the dry scent of the wild frontier, a land both beautiful and cruel. Along the edge of a shallow canyon rode Cole Tanner, a weathered cowboy whose name was known across the Arizona territory. A man of few words and hard miles, Cole carried himself with the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. His horse, a black stallion named Bandit, trotted with steady rhythm as Cole scanned the horizon for signs of game or shelter before nightfall. It had been 3 weeks since he'd left the cattle drive, searching for solitude, or perhaps running from ghosts he couldn't forget. The frontier was his refuge, its emptiness a mirror of the hollow ache in his chest. He had no destination, only direction. As the sun dipped lower, painting the rocks in firelight, Cole guided his horse into a narrow valley, a place he remembered from years past. There was a small creek there, shaded by cottonwoods, where a man could rest, water his horse, and think. But before he reached it, something caught his eye movement near the bend of the stream. He slowed his horse, squinting against the glare. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, her dark hair tangled, her body motionless against the sand. Her skin was bronzed by the sun, marked by streaks of red earth. She wore the traditional garments of the Apache, though torn and dusty from struggle. One of her legs was swollen, the skin around the wound already turning a deep, angry purple. Nearby, the sand bore the distinct serpentine pattern of a rattlesnake's tail. Cole dismounted swiftly. Years of survival had trained his instincts well. This woman had been bitten recently, and the venom was already spreading. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling over her still face. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and even in pain, her features carried a quiet strength, a warrior's beauty. The faint rise and fall of her chest told him she was still alive, barely. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Time was running out. Cole knew what he had to do. In the wild, hesitation was death. He tore a strip from his sleeve and tied it tight above the bite, forming a crude tourniquet. Then, without another thought, he lowered his head and pressed his lips against the wound, drawing the venom from her blood. The taste of bitterness filled his mouth, and he spat it out again and again, determined to draw away the poison. Sweat rolled down his temples as he repeated the desperate act, until at last he saw the swelling ease slightly. Her breathing steadied, faintly, but enough to give him hope. When the worst had passed, Cole lifted her carefully into his arms. She was feverish and trembling, whispering something in Apache, words he couldn't understand, but felt in his bones. He carried her to the creekside, laying her on a blanket from his saddlebag. As the stars began to pierce the twilight, he built a small fire, its glow flickering over her still form. He washed the wound gently with cool water and wrapped it in cloth. Through the long night, he kept watch. Coyotes howled in the distance, but Cole's hand never left the revolver at his side. Every so often, he looked down at her face, calm now, though pale under the firelight. He wondered who she was, what she was doing alone in this unforgiving land. Her moccasins were worn. Her bow and quiver lay shattered beside her. She must have been hunting or running from something. Cole didn't know, but he did know one thing: he couldn't leave her. Not out here. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the world in soft gold, the Apache woman stirred. Her eyes flickered open, dark and sharp, like polished obsidian. She looked around, confused, until her gaze found him. For a long moment, neither moved, just two strangers bound by a twist of fate in the endless Wild West. Cole rose slowly, giving her space, but her gaze held him. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also curiosity. He could tell she was trying to piece together what had happened. He wanted to speak, to reassure her, but words felt clumsy. So he simply nodded once, then turned toward the dying fire, feeding it another stick of wood. Behind him, he heard her soft breath, not in pain now, but steady. She was alive. And though neither of them knew it yet, that single act, one man's instinct to save a stranger, would ignite a bond stronger than fear, deeper than blood, and destined to change both their lives. Forever, the desert was quiet again, but everything had changed. Cole Tanner, the loner cowboy with no ties to anyone, had just tied his fate to an Apache woman whose name he did not yet know. But soon he would learn it, and when he did, his world would never be the same again. Morning rose gently over the desert, bathing the land in amber light. The fire had burned down to embers, and a chill breeze whispered through the cottonwoods. Cole Tanner sat quietly beside his horse, sharpening his knife with rhythmic precision, his mind lost in the echoes of the night before. The memory of the Apache woman's near lifeless body still haunted him, her pale lips, her trembling skin, and the taste of venom he'd spat into the sand. Now she slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The swelling in her leg had gone down slightly, though the wound still looked angry. She was strong, stronger than most. Cole could see that just by the way she clung to life, refusing to yield to the desert's cruelty. When she stirred, it was like watching a spirit return to flesh. Her eyes opened, dark and watchful, scanning her surroundings. For a long while, she simply looked around, piecing together the fragments of what had happened. Her gaze landed on Cole, silent, calm, sitting a few feet away with the patience of a man used to long silences. She tried to move, wincing from the pain in her leg. Cole turned his eyes toward her briefly, then away again, giving her the dignity of her space. She was no ordinary woman, your mindset. He offered her water from his canteen. She hesitated at first, then took it, sipping slowly. There was no exchange of words, only a quiet understanding that her life had been spared by his hand. By noon, she had regained some of her strength. Using a stick as support, she managed to sit upright. Her gaze moved to the snakebite, now bound in cloth, then to the man who had treated it. There was confusion in her eyes, but also something else, a question, unspoken but heavy in the air. Cole knew she didn't trust him. In this land, the wounds between settlers and native tribes ran deep. Many of her people had lost everything to the greed of men who looked like him, and yet, against all odds, he had saved her. He prepared a small fire again and cooked a piece of dried venison, cutting it into pieces and placing it beside her before stepping away. She hesitated, then ate slowly, hunger overcoming caution. Watching her, Cole couldn't help but feel a strange pull, a mix of respect and protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. As the day passed, she rested again. The desert was still, save for the whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk. Cole spent the afternoon scanning the horizon, aware that where there was one Apache, others were likely near. When evening came, he noticed faint tracks near the edge of the creek, not from animals, but from men. Fresh, at least 3 riders had passed nearby, perhaps within the last hour. Cole's instincts tensed. He knew what that meant. They were searching for her. He turned toward her sleeping form. Her bow and arrows lay broken, her belongings scattered, signs of a struggle. She hadn't simply been hunting, she had been running, from whom he couldn't yet tell. Night fell fast, the stars sharp and clear against the black sky. Cole kept the fire low and led his horse deeper into the shadows of the canyon. The Apache woman, though weakened, followed, leaning on him when she had to. Her touch was light, her steps uncertain, but she didn't complain. There was steel in her spirit. They reached a small alcove hidden between boulders, safe from plain sight. There, Cole helped her settle again, spreading his blanket on the ground. The silence between them spoke louder than words, two strangers bound by circumstance, yet divided by worlds. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Cole stayed awake, eyes fixed on the horizon. The faint glow of distant campfires flickered across the ridge, proof that riders were close. He knew he had to decide soon, stay and risk being caught, or move before dawn. The thought of leaving her crossed his mind only once. But the image of her lying alone, fevered and helpless, quickly drove it away. Somewhere deep within, Cole knew he wasn't just helping her out of duty. Something had shifted inside him, something he hadn't felt since before the war, before loss had hardened his heart. The night passed slowly. Coyotes howled again, echoing through the valley like ghostly voices. Cole's mind wandered through fragments of memory, the home he'd lost, the faces that haunted him, the woman whose life now rested in his care. When dawn came again, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of him sitting near the fire, staring into the distance. Her leg looked better, though the mark of the bite remained dark against her skin, a reminder of how close she had come to death. The first rays of sunlight caught her hair, turning it to strands of copper and gold. She looked fragile, yet fierce, a spirit of the desert itself. Cole didn't know her name, but he knew he couldn't abandon her now. There was danger ahead, from the men searching for her, and from the wild that showed mercy to no one. As she tried to stand, her leg faltered. Cole moved to steady her, but she waved him off, proud even in weakness. He admired that. For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. He didn't know why. Perhaps because, in her eyes, he saw something that mirrored his own, the stubborn will to survive. They gathered what little supplies they had left. Cole decided they'd move west, toward a cluster of cliffs where he once found shelter during a storm. It would be safer there, harder for anyone to track them. By midday, they were gone from the creekside, leaving only fading footprints and the ashes of a dying fire. Behind them, the riders finally appeared, 3 Apache warriors, their faces painted in black and red. They dismounted, scanning the tracks, reading the story written in the sand. Their sister had been taken by a white man, or so they thought. One of them knelt, touching the ashes still warm. He rose slowly, eyes narrowing with rage. The hunt had begun. Far ahead, Cole and the wounded Apache woman continued their slow journey through the desert, unaware that the past she fled was closing in fast, and that the bond born of mercy was about to be tested by blood. The sun burned high above the desert, pouring molten light over endless ridges of stone and sand. The wind had shifted, carrying the faint echo of hooves across the distant plain. To most ears, it would have been nothing, just another whisper in the wilderness. But to Cole Tanner, it was a warning. He knew that sound. He knew what it meant. They were being followed. He reined in his horse and turned his gaze toward the horizon. Nothing yet, only the shimmering mirage of heat. But he could feel it deep in his gut. Years on the trail had taught him to trust that instinct. Somewhere out there, riders were closing the distance, moving with the patience of men who knew the land as well as he did. The Apache woman rode behind him, wrapped in a blanket, her leg bound tightly. The color had returned to her face, though she was still weak. Every movement seemed to send a flicker of pain through her, but she made no sound. Her strength was quiet, the kind that didn't need words. Cole guided the horse along the rocky path toward a series of red cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels from the earth. He remembered this place, a labyrinth of stone and shadow where a man could disappear if he knew the way. They reached the mouth of a narrow canyon by dusk. The walls loomed high and close, painted by the setting sun in deep shades of rust and gold. Cole dismounted and helped her down carefully. She limped slightly, but her eyes scanned the cliffs with sharp awareness. Even wounded, she carried the presence of a hunter. He led the horse into the canyon, careful not to leave a clear trail. The ground here was hard, the rocks scattered, good for hiding tracks. At the base of the cliffs, they found a small hollow beneath an overhang. There, Cole gathered dry brush and lit a small fire, the smoke rising thin and pale against the darkening sky. As night fell, the desert came alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. Cole sat near the fire, cleaning his revolver, his thoughts heavy. He knew the riders behind them weren't bounty hunters or outlaws. They were Apache, her people, and they likely believed he had taken her against her will. He looked over at her, lying beside the flames. The firelight danced over her face, casting soft shadows on her cheekbones. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was calm now. For the first time since finding her, she looked at peace. He thought about the irony of it all, how saving her might lead to his own death. But something deep within him refused to regret it. He had lived too long on the edge of loneliness, too long without purpose. In saving her, he had found a reason to fight again. The night deepened. Cole stayed awake, listening to the whispers of the canyon wind. Somewhere out there, the hunters were drawing closer. He could almost hear the faint rhythm of their drums carried by the wind, slow, distant, and relentless. By morning, the air was cool and dry. The Apache woman woke to find him already saddling the horse. He had decided they couldn't stay long. The canyon was good cover, but it would not remain secret forever. She rose slowly, wincing as she tested her injured leg. The swelling had gone down, but she still moved with a limp. Cole helped her mount. Together, they rode deeper into the maze of stone, narrow passages, hidden alcoves, paths that twisted like veins through the earth. He knew this land better than most men. It had sheltered him before, and he hoped it would again. But as the sun climbed higher, he spotted movement on the ridge above. Small flashes of light, the reflection of metal in the sun. His fears were confirmed. The Apache riders had found their trail. They moved quickly now, weaving through the cliffs. Dust rose behind them, and the sound of pursuit grew louder. The chase had begun. Cole urged the horse forward, guiding it over the rough terrain. The Apache woman held tightly, her eyes wide but steady. The canyon echoed with the thunder of hooves and the distant cries of men. For hours they rode, pushing through heat and exhaustion, until at last Cole spotted a narrow crevice between two massive slabs of stone. It was barely wide enough for a horse to pass through, but it would serve. He dismounted, helping her down, and led the horse inside. Inside, the space opened into a small natural chamber, cool, dark, and hidden from sight. Cole tethered the horse and listened. Outside, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. The riders had lost their trail. He let out a slow breath, then turned toward her. She was pale again, trembling from pain and exhaustion. He knelt beside her, checking the wound. The bite still looked angry, but it hadn't worsened. He cleaned it again with water from his canteen, his movements steady and careful. She watched him the whole time, her eyes soft but unreadable. She still hadn't spoken, not in English or Apache, but something about the silence between them felt like understanding. As he worked, he noticed something around her neck, a small leather cord, from which hung a carved stone pendant shaped like a hawk. It was worn smooth from years of touch. He had seen such talismans before, symbols of tribe and lineage. Whoever she wasn't just anyone. Outside, the desert wind howled through the rocks, carrying with it the cries of distant riders. They were close again, too close. Cole knew he couldn't fight them all. If they found him, they'd kill him without question. And yet, leaving her behind was not an option. She was his responsibility now, not because he wanted it, but because fate had bound them together. As night fell once more, the stars appeared, brilliant, endless, cold. Cole sat awake, his rifle across his knees, the firelight flickering over the stone walls. The Apache woman slept beside him, her breathing steady, her face calm. In the stillness of that hidden canyon, he felt something stir inside him, something he couldn't name. Maybe it was admiration. Maybe it was the quiet pull of two souls caught between worlds. Whatever it was enough to make him stay when any other man would have fled. Far above, on the canyon rim, three shadows moved against the starlit sky, her people, searching, tracking, relentless. The night grew heavy with tension, and somewhere deep in the dark, destiny waited for the moment when hunter and hunted would finally meet. The desert night was silent, save for the whisper of wind winding through the rocks. The canyon lay in darkness, the moon veiled by clouds drifting slowly across the sky. Inside the narrow stone chamber, the fire had burned down to glowing coals. Cole Tanner sat awake beside it, his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the flickering shadows dancing against the stone. The Apache woman slept a few feet away, her breathing shallow but steady. Her face, lit faintly by the dying fire, looked peaceful now, though the faint tremor in her fingers betrayed the fever still lingering within. He could see she was strong, but her body was still fighting. Cole's mind churned with thoughts. The hunters were closing in, and he knew time was running short. He'd heard their cries echo faintly in the distance, carried on the wind like a warning. They were tracking every trace, the prints of his horse, the faint scent of smoke, the marks left by her passage. It wouldn't be long before they found this hiding place. As he stared into the coals, his eyes caught the glint of something near her hands. It was the small stone pendant he had noticed before, shaped like a hawk, carved from red jasper and worn smooth by years of touch. The firelight made it shimmer like blood. Cole had seen such pendants before. Among the Apache, they were not mere trinkets. They were symbols of clan, status, and spirit. Only certain families wore them, and only warriors or leaders bore the mark of the hawk. That realization settled heavily in his chest. Whoever this woman was, she was not an ordinary wanderer. She was someone of importance, perhaps the daughter of a chief, maybe even the bloodline of a war leader. Saving her had not just been an act of mercy, it had thrust him into a storm he could not yet see. The wind howled outside, shaking the dry brush at the canyon mouth. Cole rose silently, walking to the narrow opening and scanning the ridges above. The sky had cleared again, and the stars blazed in cold clarity. From up high, a hawk cried out, a lone sound slicing through the night, as if echoing her spirit itself. Behind him she stirred. The movement was faint, but her eyes opened slowly, dark and sharp even in the dim light. She sat up, clutching her leg and drawing in a careful breath. The fever had eased, but exhaustion lingered in her every movement. She looked toward Cole, watching him as he scanned the horizon. There was something unspoken in her gaze, something between trust and caution. She didn't yet know who he truly was, and he didn't know who she truly was either. Yet fate had bound them together in this hostile land. As dawn broke, the firelight faded beneath the glow of morning. The desert came alive again, the endless expanse of gold and red stretching in every direction. Cole packed his things quickly. They couldn't stay. The Apache trackers would not stop until they found her. He helped her mount his horse again, though she protested weakly. Her pride was fierce, but her body was frail. He lifted her carefully into the saddle and guided the horse toward a narrow pass leading deeper into the high cliffs. The path was rough, littered with sharp stones and loose sand. The horse stumbled at times, but Cole pressed forward. Behind them, the sound of distant hooves echoed faintly, too distant to be sure, but close enough to make him uneasy. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking the valley. From up there, they could see the endless stretch of desert and the glint of movement below. 3 riders, moving fast, following their trail. Cole clenched his jaw. There was no use hiding anymore. Sooner or later, they'd catch up. His only choice now was to get her to safety, and that meant reaching the old mining camp in the foothills beyond the canyon. It was abandoned now, but it had wells and shelter. If he could get her there, they might stand a chance. They rode on through the heat, the sun burning mercilessly overhead. Sweat darkened Cole's shirt, and the horse's flanks glistened with effort. The Apache woman swayed slightly in the saddle, her strength fading, but her eyes never lost their focus. She was fighting to stay conscious, to stay alive. By evening, the cliffs opened into a narrow valley, and the faint outline of old wooden structures came into view, the remains of the mining camp. Half-collapsed shacks, broken carts, and the skeletal frame of an old water tower stood silent beneath the crimson sunset. Cole led her into one of the remaining cabins, its roof mostly intact. Dust and sand covered the floor, but it was shelter. He laid her down gently, giving her water and what little food remained. As night fell again, he built another fire and listened to the distant echoes of pursuit. The Apache riders were close now. He could feel it. Every crack of twig or sigh of wind felt like a threat. The woman lay still, her eyes half open, fixed on the pendant at her chest. She held it tightly, whispering something under her breath, words Cole couldn't understand, but that filled the air with a quiet, sacred weight. He realized then what she was doing. She was praying not to be saved, but for strength, for courage, for her ancestors to watch over her. Cole turned his eyes away, humbled. There was something in that prayer, something ancient and untamed, that made his own fears seem small. Hours passed. The fire crackled softly, then a sound, faint but distinct, the crunch of boots outside. Cole froze, every muscle tensed. He moved to the door, rifle ready, and peered through the cracks in the wood. The moonlight revealed 3 riders dismounting at the edge of the camp. Their faces were painted in black and red, their eyes burning with purpose. They were here. Cole turned back toward the woman. She was awake now, her eyes calm but fierce. She knew who they were. Her people. For a long moment, she and Cole stared at each other, understanding without words what was about to happen. If he stayed, he'd die. If he left her, she might live, but he couldn't be sure. He moved closer to the window again. The Apache warriors were spreading out, moving silently through the ruins. One of them held a torch, another carried a bow, and the third, the one in front, bore a large feathered headdress. Cole's blood ran cold. He recognized that symbol, the headdress of an Apache chief, and then it struck him, the pendant, the hawk symbol, her silent dignity. She wasn't just any woman. She was the daughter of the chief himself. The truth hit him like a bullet. He had saved the life of the chief's daughter. And now her people had come to kill the man they thought had taken her. Outside, the torchlight flickered closer. The horses neighed softly in the distance. Cole's hand tightened around his rifle, knowing that before the night was over, the canyon would taste blood. The wind swept low across the empty mining camp, carrying with it the dry scent of sand and the faint echo of approaching danger. The night sky burned crimson, painted by a rising blood moon that hung heavy over the desert. It was an omen, one that whispered of violence and fate. Cole Tanner crouched by the window of the old cabin, his rifle steady in his hands. Outside, 3 Apache warriors moved like shadows among the ruins. Their faces were painted with black streaks, their eyes glinting beneath the torchlight. They advanced silently, their footsteps muffled against the sand. Inside, the wounded woman lay still, her dark eyes fixed on the door. She knew these men, their movements, their formation, the way they spread out before an attack. They were her kin, her father's warriors, and they believed she was a captive. Cole could see them clearly now. The one leading wore an elaborate headdress of hawk feathers, each feather bound with red sinew, the mark of a tribal leader. His posture was commanding, his movements deliberate. There was no doubt left. The man searching for her was her father, the Apache chief himself. The truth cut deep. The woman he had saved from death was no ordinary wanderer. She was the daughter of a man who would now see him as the enemy. The sound of a horse's snort echoed across the camp, breaking the silence. One of the warriors raised his hand in warning. They were close now, close enough that Cole could see the flicker of their torches dance across the wooden walls. He glanced at the woman once more. Her eyes met his, calm and unafraid. In that silent exchange, there was understanding. She knew he would fight to protect her, even against her own blood, and though she couldn't speak it, her gaze held a sorrowful gratitude. Cole took a slow breath and stepped back from the window. The rifle felt heavy in his hands. He had been in enough fights to know how this would end. 3 against 1, and only a few rounds left, but he had faced worse odds before. Outside, the warriors moved closer, spreading into a semicircle. The torchlight flickered brighter as they prepared to strike. Cole positioned himself by the door, his pulse steady, his senses sharpened. The creak of old wood, the rustle of wind through dry grass, he heard it all. Then came the first movement, a shadow darting past the window, followed by a low whistle. Cole didn't hesitate. A single gunshot cracked through the night, echoing like thunder against the canyon walls. The nearest warrior dropped, his torch falling to the ground. The silence shattered. Shouts erupted, echoing in Apache tongue, filled with fury and grief. The other 2 moved swiftly, taking cover behind the stone ruins. Arrows whistled through the air, striking the cabin walls with deadly precision. Splinters of wood flew around Cole's face, but he didn't flinch. He reloaded quickly, the metallic click of the rifle sharp in the stillness. Another arrow hissed past, grazing his shoulder. He bit back a grunt of pain and fired again. The second warrior stumbled back, clutching his side before disappearing into the shadows. The chief advanced slowly, not rushing like the others. His torch burned bright in one hand, his rifle gripped in the other. He was a man who had fought many battles and feared none. He called out into the night, his voice low, commanding, filled with rage and sorrow. Cole didn't understand the words, but their meaning was clear. The chief was calling for his daughter, calling her name. Inside, the woman stirred, her breath quickening. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, her leg throbbing with pain. She could hear her father's voice, the voice of the man who had raised her, who believed she had been taken. Tears glistened in her eyes as she reached for her pendant, clutching it tight. She wanted to go to him, to show him she was alive, that she had not been stolen. But her body was too weak, and the battle outside was too fierce. Cole saw her movement and turned, his eyes softening for just a moment. He knew what she wanted to do, but it was too dangerous. If she stepped outside now, she could be struck down by mistake. Outside, the chief's voice grew louder, more desperate. The fire from the fallen torch spread across the sand, licking at the dry boards of the nearby shack. Flames began to rise, casting the camp in a flickering red glow that danced beneath the blood moon. Cole moved toward the back of the cabin, scanning for a way out. The heat was rising fast, smoke curling around them. The Apache woman tried to stand, but her leg gave out beneath her. Cole caught her, lifting her into his arms once again. The fire roared louder now, and the air filled with the acrid scent of smoke. The roof above began to creak, the old wood ready to give way. Cole kicked open the back door and stepped into the shadows of the canyon, carrying her close. Behind them, the cabin burst into flames, a tower of fire lighting up the night. The Apache chief saw the blaze and roared, thinking his daughter was inside. He dropped his weapon and ran toward the burning structure, his warriors following close behind. Cole moved fast through the darkness, heading toward the ridge. The woman stirred weakly in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. The heat of the fire glowed behind them like a second sunrise, casting long shadows across the sand. When they reached the ridge, Cole laid her gently on the ground and turned to look back. The flames devoured the camp below, sparks rising into the red sky. He could see the faint shapes of the Apache warriors moving near the fire, their shouts lost in the roar of the blaze. The woman's eyes fluttered open. She looked toward the fire and then at Cole, realization dawning. Her father would think she had perished in the flames, that the man who had taken her was gone with her. It was a cruel twist of fate, but perhaps the only one that could save them both. Cole turned away from the blaze, his face shadowed by the moonlight. He knew they couldn't stay. They had to keep moving westward, toward the open plains where no one would follow. He lifted her again, his arms steady despite the weight of exhaustion. The night wind blew hard, carrying with it the scent of smoke, ashes, and something else, the lingering pulse of destiny. The desert had taken much from both of them, but it had given them something, too, a bond born not of words, but of survival and silent understanding. As the flames died down behind them, Cole Tanner and the Apache woman disappeared into the night. Two souls bound by fate, walking toward a horizon neither could yet see. But far behind them, in the ashes of the burning camp, the Apache chief stood alone, staring into the embers. He lifted his hand toward the sky, his eyes filled with grief and fury. The hawk's cry echoed overhead, sharp and haunting. The desert was not done with them yet. The first light of dawn spread across the desert, washing the land in soft gold and crimson. The night's chill faded, replaced by the slow warmth of a rising sun. The world seemed still, as if holding its breath after the storm that had swept through the canyon. Cole Tanner led his weary horse through the narrow pass, the Apache woman resting quietly in the saddle. Her leg, still wrapped in the cloth he had torn from his own shirt, showed signs of healing. The venom had nearly taken her life once, but now she looked stronger, pale yet alive, her dark hair catching the first rays of the morning sun. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the rustle of sand under their boots and the distant call of a hawk circling above. Cole's eyes scanned the horizon. Beyond the ridge lay open plains, endless grass, rivers glinting like silver, and the faint outline of distant mountains. Freedom, behind them, smoke still rose from the burn, Doubt mining camp. The Apache chief and his warriors would find nothing but ashes and the bones of the night's fire. They would believe their daughter lost to the flames, taken from this world as suddenly as the wind changes in the desert. Cole knew the truth of it all, that her survival now carried a burden neither of them had asked for. If her people discovered she still lived, and that she had escaped with a white man, it could mean bloodshed. But if they stayed hidden, if they disappeared into the vastness of the frontier, perhaps they could both find peace. They rode for hours under the strengthening sun, stopping only when they reached a narrow river cutting through the land. The water shimmered blue against the dusty red earth. Cole helped her down, and she knelt beside the river, cupping water in her hands. The reflection that looked back at her was no longer the frightened woman who had lain dying from a snake bite days ago. It was someone transformed, tempered by suffering, by courage, by fate itself. Cole watched her from a distance, his weathered face unreadable. He had seen death many times in gunfights, in battle, in the unforgiving land, but never had he felt the weight of protecting another life the way he did now. The Apache woman had come to mean something he couldn't name. He gathered dry wood and built a small fire. The smoke curled into the morning sky, blending with the mist that hung low over the valley. They had no words to share, no language that could bridge the worlds they came from, but they didn't need them. The silence between them was enough. As the day grew long, the heat settled over the land. The horizon shimmered, bending light and distance together. Cole knew they couldn't stay in one place too long. The desert had a way of swallowing secrets, but it also carried whispers, and whispers could find their way to dangerous ears. By late afternoon, they reached a small mesa overlooking the open plains. Below, wild horses ran free, their manes catching the wind. The sight was beautiful, wild, untamed, just like the world they belonged to. The Apache woman stood beside him, leaning lightly on his arm for balance. Her eyes followed the horses below, and though her face was calm, her thoughts were deep. She was leaving behind everything, her tribe, her blood, her past. For Cole, too, it was a kind of farewell. The life he'd known, drifting from one dusty town to another, chasing work, running from ghosts, had come to an end the day he found her lying in the desert. Saving her life had saved something in him too, something long buried beneath years of dust and silence. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of fire and rose. Shadows stretched long across the land. Cole tightened the saddle straps and prepared the horse for travel once more. The world ahead was uncertain, but there was no turning back. As they rode down from the mesa, the wind rose soft at first, then carrying with it the whispering cry of the desert. Somewhere far behind them, the Apache chief knelt before the ashes of the burned camp. In his hand, he held a charred piece of silver, a pendant once worn by his daughter. He raised his eyes to the horizon, where the sun was setting. The hawk that had followed them for days circled overhead, its cry echoing through the canyon. To him it was a sign, a message from the spirits that his daughter had crossed into another world. He bowed his head and let her go. Back on the plains, Cole and the woman pressed on. The air grew cooler as night approached, and the sky filled with stars, a sea of light stretching endlessly above them. They stopped by a grove of mesquite trees, the fire crackling softly between them. The woman closed her eyes, resting against the saddle blanket. The flames painted her face in soft amber light. Cole sat across from her, the glow reflecting in his eyes. He knew they could never return, not to her tribe, not to any town. The frontier was the only home left to them now. The desert stretched vast and quiet around them, and for the first time in a long while there was peace. Not the kind that comes with safety, but the kind that comes with acceptance of who they were and what fate had made them. When dawn came again, the world was golden, the storm of the past was gone. The woman stood on her own for the first time, her strength returning. Cole saddled the horse, glancing toward her with quiet pride. They rode out together into the rising sun, two souls bound by chance, by survival, by something deeper than either could name. The land ahead was endless, wild, and waiting. The wind carried their silhouettes across the plains, the cowboy and the Apache woman, disappearing slowly into the horizon until they were just shadows in the light. And somewhere in that vast silence of the desert, the spirits of the land watched over them, the snake that had struck, the wind that had carried them together, and the earth that had taken and given life once more. Their story would not be told in words, but in the whispers of the wind and the dust of the trails they left behind. The desert remembered everything,